Hello all, welcome to episode 11 of SellerSPEAK. I'm Ram Menon, your Director for Community Outreach at SellerApp. Today we are joined by someone who in this e-commerce sourcing known as Master of Sourcing, Ashish Monga, a founder of Hong Kong-based IMEX Sourcing Services, a sourcing and a product development company which helps Amazon users procure materials from Asia, quality control and complete project management. Over the last 7 years, Ashish has been focused on creating solutions just for importers so that they can reduce their time investment and cut costs while procuring materials from Asia. When he's not meeting with clients and creating complex strategy solutions, he has his personal blog, thesourcingblog.com, and a YouTube channel in the same name, which again further focuses on procuring materials from China. We welcome Ash to SellerSpeak.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Good. Ash, first up, you were a procurement expert before starting your own venture at IMEX Sourcing Services. What led you to this? What led you to set up this agency in China, knowing that there's a lot of uncertainty involved? And what kind of challenges did you face, and how did you tackle these issues?
So my relationship with China actually started well before I came to China. So when I was at university, I started bringing in products from China and India. So my first venture was a wholesale e-commerce website where we're selling all kinds of products, but a lot of like fashion products. And I did that for about 5 or 6 years. And during that process, I had to communicate with suppliers. It was a great experience, but there were also a lot of hiccups in the process. So at the end of that, I was really fascinated by China with the boom in China. It was in news all the time. So I finally thought might as well go to the other side and see how that goes. And once I came to China, I never really went back. So the first year was just getting to know the culture, getting to know the markets, where the suppliers are, how everything works. I didn't really have a business plan at that stage. And from there, I kind of started participating in a lot of online discussions, answering questions for people in terms of how to deal with suppliers. And that eventually led to me starting IMEX Sourcing. And this was almost more than 7 years ago, in fact. We started off with just two people, and we've kind of grown to about 25 plus people now. So it's been an exciting journey. To answer the second part of your question, there were no real challenges as such. I think the biggest challenge was really the language, and there was also a steep learning curve when it came to. There's the international side of things, but there's the QC and compliance side, which tends to be a lot more technical. And I'm still learning stuff about compliance because it's a massive area and very technical. So that was one of the challenges, I would say.
So, do you think is there any requirements, let's say, to learn the language to go ahead with it?
I mean, if you are importing from China, learning the language is not really necessary. If you're running a business in China, that would definitely, you know, give you an edge. But having said that, more and more people are speaking English in China. So from the point of view of running a business, you can always have a team to sort of get you going. We have a lot of bilingual people working here, so language hasn't really been that much of a barrier. uh, unless I was to talk to suppliers myself. And when you're talking about product issues or quality issues, that's when, as a foreigner, you might face some challenges.
Okay. So this is for all the Amazon sellers who are new to Amazon FBA or sourcing items. After researching and finalizing a profitable product, you'd want to sell. There's always that critical stage of procuring materials for it. And in layman terms, what do you think are the major factors one has to look up when choosing a reliable supplier?
Well, I think the most important thing is actually defining what a reliable supplier means for you, because it can mean completely different things for different people. So that's really important. The other part of this equation is defining your QC standards up front, and then talk about pricing. So most people do it the other way around. They go on Alibaba, they shortlist like 10 suppliers, and they find the three cheapest one, and then they start talking about specifications and features and stuff like that. So that process should deliver exactly what you want and then get into pricing. But other than that, in terms of the factors you would look for in a supplier, I would say, some of the key ones are how long they've been in business making that specific product, speed and quality of their responses. So are they quick in getting back to you? Do they answer technical questions well? The third factor is, do they really value your business? So this is an important one. You want to be working with someone who values your business. And finally, are they open to inspections and audits? Most suppliers these days are open to inspections and audit, but every now and then, you run into suppliers who are not always willing to cooperate when it comes to inspections. So that's something I would advise people should look at.
I think this is in relation to the previous question as well. Should new importers be working with a trader or an agent that represents a factory, with the factory or with the factory directly, or what are the tips you would give the viewers to improving communications and building, kind of a long-term, lasting relationship with the suppliers?
So again, this kind of boils down to your goals. I would kind of divide. I mean, there are probably three options here. You have trading companies, and you have sourcing companies like us. IMEX Sourcing, and there's plenty of other sourcing companies out there. And then you've got the option of working directly with the factories, and they all have their pros and cons. So if you were working with a trading company, the main benefit I could think of is uh, if you wanted to buy a very large range of products from one supplier. Trading companies tend to be, they tend to have a pretty decent sized catalog. They tend to be better at communicating and stuff. And normally they're also a good fit for smaller orders. Uh, Sourcing companies, I'll actually come to sourcing companies later. Working with suppliers, it's a lot easier to do if you have the resources to manage that. So there are two key things here. One is, do you have the time to handhold the suppliers? Because the suppliers do need a lot of handholding, monitoring the process and kind of staying in touch with them to see what's happening with the orders, educating them in terms of your compliance requirements. And especially you have someone who can do this in Chinese, that makes a huge difference in terms of the quality of the product. And I would say, other than that, it's also about what sort of knowledge have you got about compliance and QC processes and stuff. If you have a background in those areas, then it's a lot easier to work with suppliers. Or if you have a supply chain guy in your team, it's easier to work with the factories.
So
and then
please go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. So I was just saying, the third option is working with a sourcing company, and that can work for new importers who know very little about the process. And there are companies that would specialize in working with newer importers, and then there are companies like ours where we focus on kind of importers who are doing decent sized volumes. And the advantages there are, you can actually focus on your core capabilities and outsource the process, because sourcing is a very, very manpower intensive process. And also being on the ground can make a pretty big difference, because you have to chase factories, call them up, there's time zone differences, a lot of other things like that. And then it's also about having resources. So for example, in terms of the QC process, we have a process that's been refined over the last 7 years. We have added clauses to the contract. We have a strategic partnership with say TUV, where when it comes to compliance requirements, we understand what the requirements for different products or different markets are. So that's where the value add really is. If you're looking to scale a business quickly, it also makes sense to outsource the process.
As you will probably know of all the people, there could be a lot of risk heading first into sourcing from China without any knowledge or experience. How should a sourcing newbie handle this, crisis, like, low quality of the source materials or shipment delays? How can a beginner ensure that, these product qualities, consistent, when sourcing from Asia?
I think the most important thing is prioritizing due diligence over inspection. So in my opinion, the process really starts well before there is a crisis. Crisis normally happens because when especially for a lot of the e-commerce sellers, when they find a new product, they're really excited about launching the product. So they go to Alibaba, talk to a few suppliers, and they send the deposit for an order. And we actually spend a lot of time in this phase. We could sometimes spend 30 to 60 days shortlisting a supplier before we place an order. And that's because we know that the time spent upfront in most cases would be recovered during the production state, and especially during the crisis management state, because you can completely eliminate that stage by spending the time upfront. So due diligence, really trumps any QC process that happens after the production has started. So that would be the first thing. The second thing is it's very important to detect issues while the goods are still in China. So, inspections are obviously important. Getting the supplier to send you updates, send you pictures of different phases during production. If you have a low level of trust in the supplier, if it's your first order, doing a more intensive inspection, for example, checking like 50% of the goods as opposed to 5%. So there's a lot of things you can do, but the key is to find issues while the goods are still in China and while you haven't paid the balance to the supplier, as opposed to finding them once the goods have left China, because normally in that case, it's too late to be able to do anything.
In one of your interviews, you have said that there are certain advantages for an FBA seller to work with smaller factories rather than with the big factories. Could you please elaborate on this point?
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's any advantage in working with a smaller factory or vice versa. I think it's more about it's very important that there's a match between the value of the order or the size of the importer and the size of the factory. Because what happens is, if the factory is really large and it's a small importer, it's really hard to get them to prioritize your order. We always see delays in such scenarios. The factory wouldn't go out of their way to customize products, which is a major issue if you're private labeling your products. And again, if you're a really large buyer for a very small factory, that could mean that you have compliance issues, QC issues. So it's very important that there is a fit between the size of the factory and the size of the importer.
We have heard that you're an expert negotiator yourself, and your team at IMX handles China specific negotiation strategies. To all the importers out there who's new to sourcing and would say this is the best way to negotiate with all the suppliers, what is a good kind of a procedure you have to follow?
So negotiating in China is, I think the number one thing is patience. Suppliers are very patient. And I think one of the things with negotiation is, when you are excited about launching the product, you're chasing the supplier all the time. And that doesn't really help with your, negotiations. I like to say that Chinese in general are very patient people. That's one of the great virtues that I see people have here. So if you're chasing them every second day about, hey, what do you think of my offer, normally it gets hard. But I think now, talking about the process, it's very important to not start the negotiation until very late in the process. The standard process that I think we discussed this a while ago, people would do is go to Alibaba, negotiate on price, and then talk about other things. It's important you talk about the quality standards, come to an agreement on what the specs and everything would be, because you will find when you start having that discussion, the prices start going up. The first quotes a supplier on Alibaba would send you on Alibaba or any other trade platform would be based on a product that in most cases doesn't meet the compliance requirements of most developed countries. Then when you start talking about those little things, they will start raising the price, saying, hey, if you want this much RAM, then this would be $2 more if you want to make this change. So once you've come to an agreement on the standard, that's when you start talking about prices. So what I suggest is shortlisting 3 suppliers based on the other criteria that we discussed earlier, speed of responsiveness, being able to manufacture that product, and then get into pricing negotiation. And other than that, if your volumes are small, which tends to be an issue with a lot of people starting out in Amazon, you have to have a convincing story about why, how your volumes are going to grow. But the fact is, suppliers have heard a lot of that, and they're pretty immune to it now. So in terms of negotiating, nothing beats, volumes. That's what the suppliers want. If you can give them volumes, they tend to be a lot more flexible. A final tip here is it's always a good idea to renegotiate after you place about 3 orders with a factory in China, because at that point you've kind of uh, shown that you are a stable business, you are serious about this product, and ideally you've grown your volumes, and that's a good time to renegotiate as well.
Apart from the B2B companies, is there any other non-profit groups, which assist people who are new to sourcing it from the Asian supply market?
I can't really think of any non-profit groups off the top of my head, but in Hong Kong, there's the HKTDC, the Hong Kong Trade Development Council. There's quite a lot of blogs out there. China Importal is a really good blog. I have a blog called the Sourcing Blog, and there are a few others out there. And then finally, there's a lot of educational events and conferences that normally happen around the trade shows. So, with Global Sources, there's the Global Sources Summit, and there's quite a few things going around the Canton Fair time as well. So those are all good resources for people just getting started.
I know that you've spent several years working in China, but one of your major markets is also the UK and US importers. There's and always a drive to get some new ideas, introduce some new prototypes to the market. How important do you think it is for large sellers to innovate and to be up to date on their selling techniques?
So it's getting increasingly important. I think especially the last 2 years, private label is getting very difficult. For when Amazon FBA first started, about 5 years ago, it was a great time to get in. You could pick up anything, put your brand on it, and take a course out there that will guide you through the process, and you could make pretty decent money. Now that's not happening anymore. Amazon has raised the barriers to stay in the game, so that's one challenge. Uh, so yeah, it's increasingly important to customize, and I like to think there are a few different phases of customization. So as a minimum, you could add some feature upgrades, change colors, those little minor changes you can make to differentiate yourself. Then you have bundling, so you could bundle your product with other products that in combinations that don't exist in the marketplace. So that's one way to differentiate yourself. Even that is pretty short term though, because within a few months, if the product's doing well, you'll find competitors coming out with the same bundles. So that takes us to new product development. And again, you could have simple new product development projects where you come up with a product that has good demand but might be actually fairly simple to manufacture, and those are the best ones. Or you could come up with something very complex, patented and stuff, and that gives you long-term competitive advantage, because then you essentially block out competitors.
To touch base on all the discussions we have so far, what is a kind of a checklist you would keep in mind to establish and execute a successful sourcing strategy?
I would say, be extremely clear on the products that you want. Again, define them in as much detail as you can. And this is easier said than done, because like 90% of the import inquiries that we get are too basic for us to be able to get an accurate quote or to be able to understand the potential issues. So that's really important. And there are ways to do that. You can go on YouTube and watch videos on the manufacturing process for that product, or you could read reviews, and especially negative reviews from competing products on Amazon. So there's a lot of ways to find out, what the issues with the product are, what the specs should be. And once you've done that, create a RFQ, request for quotation. Then go to Alibaba, start talking to suppliers, drill down your 3 best suppliers, and then I would get them to make samples. And once I have approved samples from 3 suppliers, that's when I would start negotiating. That's when I start talking price. And at that point, you're actually better placed to negotiate, because the supplier has invested, 3 to 6 weeks, sometimes 2 months, creating that sample. So they want to go ahead with the transaction as well. That's the time when, you can talk pricing. And it's really important that you're not cutting corners in terms of quality just to save 10 cents, etc. Because normally you would end up paying more in terms of your return rate. You would end up killing your sales in terms of negative reviews. So that's a couple more things I do at the production stage. Ask the supplier for status updates, pictures. I would definitely, as a minimum, I would do an inspection, and yeah, that's the process that we follow pretty much.
Lastly, as you mentioned, you have your own online blog as well as your YouTube channel, the sourcingblog.com, which has a lot of useful and practical information, on sourcing from Asian suppliers. This blog and the channel gets a lot of traction, gets a lot of feedback and reviews. So how has the feedback been so far?
The feedback has been great. It's actually I actually enjoy the process of writing in the blog because it makes me think through our processes and see where optimizations could be made. And it also makes you feel really good when someone who reads the blog reaches out to you, because it kind of makes you feel that all that effort is worth it. And it's a great channel for me personally to get feedback on the sort of challenges people are facing. So it kind of allows us to evolve our services or create, the ad hoc services to support our core business. So yeah, it's been a great experience. I've been loving it.
To kind of round off on the discussion we have had so far, is there any pointers you want to give out to all our viewers out there?
Um, we have actually literally we almost in the process of finishing this. We're coming up with a checklist that people can use to shortlist sourcing companies, because with sourcing companies it's become in all shapes and sizes. So it's really important to know whether you need a sourcing company in the first place. And I think we have an article on that on the website. I'll send you a link later. But there's a very useful checklist which you could share with your readers or with your listeners, and I can send that to you after this call.
Interesting, Ash. That is actually a perfect idea. I'm pretty sure all the input is out there waiting for this checklist to come out to make the life much more easier. Ash, thank you once again. Thank you for your time. It's been a really great conversation we've had so far.
Great, thanks a lot, Ram. Really nice talking to you, and thanks for having me.
Thank you to all of viewers out there. Please subscribe on our YouTube channel, like our Facebook page, follow us on Instagram, and please do not hesitate to go to our website www.sellerapp.com and check our free 7-day trial period. Thank you once again.